Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome to It's the Legacy for Us, a conversation with Anita Hill and GGE. My name is Joanne Smith, and I am the founder of Girls for Gender Equity. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, we celebrate the launch of our 20-year anniversary celebration. This conversation has been 20 years in the making. As most of you know, GGE's founding story begins on 9/11, when I received a fellowship from Open Society Foundation and thought that this would be an 18-month Title IX strategy. And when those 18 months were over, we were going to know all of the Title IX coordinators in 1,700 schools throughout New York City. They were going to be in compliance, and we were going to be able to move on. So it didn't take long to know and recognize that we needed to double down on our strategy, and that our efforts towards the horizon of gender and racial equity would require more. It would require us to have resources, and it will require us as a strategy to be a nonprofit. And so in June of 2022, we celebrate 20 years of Girls for Gender Equity. Most of you, I see so many friends in here, have been a part of our 20-year journey and are no stranger to who I am about to honor and welcome onto the stage. Our living legend friend. Her name is a complete sentence and means so much to us in the movement and at Girls for Gender Equity. I want to welcome to the stage the indomitable Anita Faye Hill.
Thank you so much, Joanne. It is
Anita,
wonderful to be here, and I'm so happy to start your celebration of your 20th anniversary.
Thank you so much. It's so good to lay eyes on you, even though, though it's virtually.
I know. I'm so glad the day has come, and I'm, as I said, I'm very excited about celebrating and so excited about the conversation that I am about to have with the panelists that you're going to introduce.
Yeah, well, congratulations on your third book. It's a true gift to the movement. Starting about 10 years ago, it moved to End Violence, a 10-year initiative towards ending gender-based violence. We started off by trying to write a position paper, and it felt like it needed to be a book. And I feel like this is the book that we were trying to write, really track, the history of the movement. And it's not a place that many people, choose to do the work in. So we thank you for doing this work. But before we get into the book, I know that yesterday on Indigenous People Day, on National Coming Out Day, on International Day of the Girl, it marked the 30-year anniversary of the Thomas hearings. How are you? Can I just ask, how are you?
You're so kind to ask. We sometimes forget that people who we know who have been through experiences that we see on TV are actually living, breathing people with feelings and emotions and anxieties. Yesterday was okay. It felt good. I think much of the anxiety that I might have had for the day, the 30th anniversary, I took care of by writing the book. Nice. And so that was an energizing and healing process. And I recommend writing to everyone, even, whether you're writing a book or a short story or fact, nonfiction, or whatever you want to produce, getting it down in words can be a wonderful experience and something to pass along to others.
That's right. How did you spend the day?
I worked. I actually did quite a bit of work for the book, as well as some work that as I say, my regular day job, which is at Brandeis, and some work for the Hollywood Commission that I chair.
Wow. Okay. Well, I hope that you, at some point, once this tour is over, really get a good vacation in there and some rest. And you've definitely earned it. And I just thank you. I really thank you for returning to our space for the second intergenerational conversation. The first conversation followed the release of Reimagining Equality, which I have here. If folks have not seen Reimagining Equality, please pick it up. And we honored you at our 10-year anniversary. During that time, you had an intergenerational conversation with Nefertiti and Emily, where they marked the parallels of gentrification and the Barclay Center opening up in Brooklyn and needing to reimagine equality. And then 8 years ago, we were with you at Sundance viewing Anita speaking truth to power, and you were so generous and so kind. You took us in to be with your family. And, it's just really, truly for us also a full circle moment. There's not many people who are always a yes to us. And you are truly a yes to us. And it means the world to me. I want you to know.
And that conversation, I will not forget. It was I've been so impressed by your work. And you were featured in Anita. And I hope people will watch it just for that alone, to see how you have been working on these issues in the schools and the lives that you've affected. Emily and Nefertiti being two of them. And I just recall how impressed I was with their knowledge, and the reality is that they were so much more knowledgeable because of the work that you've done. Certainly more knowledgeable than my generation about the issues that they are facing as teenagers, but will continue to face unless we start to find solutions to it.
That's right. And I'm so grateful for them. And as well as these brilliant young people I'm going to bring on, we call it a practice, and we're just taking turns practicing speaking truth to power. And so I want to introduce to the stage two of the practitioners and co-conspirators who will be in conversation with you. I'll first start with Ashley Newland. They, them is a Girls for Gender Equity Sisters in Strength and Young Women's Advisory Council alumni. Ashley is an outspoken youth organizer who guides their peers and themselves through healing. They believe in radical body acceptance and are passionate about the Black Lives Movement. They know that they must do that work surrounded by people who look like them and who are at different levels of their healing journeys. Ashley, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. And the second co-conspirator is Pony White, she, her. Pony works with GGE on our National Young Women's Advisory Council and a national agenda for Black girls. She's a dedicated reproductive rights organizer who advocates legislatively for young people's access to affordable reproductive health care, inclusive comprehensive sexual education curriculums, and for mandates to protect queer and trans youth and sexual violence victims. Please welcome Pony to the stage. And I'll say, take it away, Pony.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for that introduction. And hello, Professor Hill. I am so excited to just be here with you. And I thank you so much for making the time to have this conversation with all of us and the viewers who are watching. We've been able to dive into your book a little bit, and it has been so great, so enlightening. Sometimes you have to take a pause and just take things in, but just very appreciative of you being here. And so diving into our first question of the night is, early in the book, you talk about being concerned about talking to a group of young people who were born after your testimony, such as myself. How has it been meeting different generations over the years? Do you still feel there is a disconnect, or do you feel that since white supremacy and gender violence are a global constant, that has bridged the generational rift?
Well, I think that comment came at the 20th anniversary about 10 years ago of the hearing. And that was when I first got introduced to Joanne Smith in Girls for Gender Equity. And the conference was really a bit daunting. And I realized that 20 years meant that there had been a whole generation of people born who, of course, had not been there at the time of the hearing in 1991. And I just questioned whether they would see the relevance of that testimony, whether they would see themselves in the conversations that were going to be happening on stage that day at the event at Hunter College, and whether the concerns that I had growing up when I was their age really mattered to them. That was part of my anxiety, I think, but I was quickly disabused of that because it turns out that the audience was filled with young people and there were young people on the stage. And I'm not sure that generations have been bridged entirely. I do think that gender violence is something that we share in common across generations, unfortunately. I think it can be a bridging factor in our understanding of social justice and equity and really the empowerment of individuals who have been vulnerable or who are marginalized by society. So I think it can be that, but I'm not sure we're there yet. We, we can talk more about it, but one of the things I want to maybe probe with you all is that how do you see the solutions? Every generation sees a problem, they may see it differently. And certainly when it comes to solving it, they may see solutions that are different. My generation, growing up in the civil rights era, we thought all the solutions would come through courts and laws and litigation. And that's just an example that I think your generation, millennials, maybe even post-millennials at this point, probably have different ideas about that. But I do hope it's something that we can all work on together.
Yeah, I definitely want to open the floor to the other panelists if they want to answer that question of how our generation is tackling some of the gender violence conflicts.
I think it's an interesting balance because there is a heavy, there's a general acknowledgement that there is sexual violence happening and it's wrong, obviously. But when it comes to taking action, there is no one way to do it. There are some people who feel like they should take matters into their own hands. And then there are people who feel like, you need to do things the traditional way, like getting police and courts involved. And both have their pros and cons. We know going through courts and police are it's like a dead end. The chance of you seeking justice that way is really it's not something that's tangible most of the time. And taking things into your own hands, it raises the question of well, how far would you go to make sure that justice is sought after? It's too subjective. Yeah, I think it just really depends on who you ask.
I agree, Ashley. I think one of the things that I have learned and explore in the book, Believing, is that we have to think of alternatives to the criminal justice system to deal with issues like sexual assault and even civil rights issues. So many times, I think the big disappointment is that those are the systems that are failing us. Those are the systems that are criminalizing people and imprisoning people at a ghastly rate, and that you don't want to continue to participate in that system through an anti-gender violence movement. On the other hand, there are people who are hurting and they, are feeling the pain of this hurt, and they really don't have a viable place to go, a place where they feel that they will receive the kind of justice that they need that's transformative and that is community affirming. And so, I have heard from people over and over, for example, young Black women in particular who have been abused in some way or another, and they want to challenge their abusers, but at the same time, they don't want to bring shame to the community. They don't want to, maybe they don't want to participate because they really believe that the prison system is unfair and unjust, and they don't want to contribute to that, or they don't think the police will treat them well. They believe that, in fact, that the police will criminalize them in the process, and that they will have no control over their case, their claims, that they lose control entirely over what happens. So it is hard. On the other hand, I also hear from young Black men who want to be part of this anti-violence, gender violence movement, either because of someone they love or because they've been victimized or for any number of reasons, but they are so aware of the criminalization and over-sexualization of Black men, and therefore they're afraid that maybe they'll be falsely accused or that they won't have any rights that are recognized by the criminal justice system to defend themselves. So it really comes down to how do we develop community responses. And I have a wonderful friend who has done some work on these very issues in historically Black colleges and universities. Beverly Guy Sheftal. She has been a tireless warrior at her college, which is Spelman, as well as other colleges throughout the range of HBCUs. And, and she has urged us to come together really and understand that it's for the good of the community to end gender violence. But also we have to, at the same time, confront and destabilize the racism that's a part of the gender violence that Black women encounter when, and so, it's a complex problem. It's a cultural issue. It's a legal issue. And we've got to come at it in different ways.
Thank you for sharing. I know you touched on a lot about community support. And for my response to your earlier question, I would say, I think that's something that my generation is doing really well. And it's definitely due to like the fruits of your labor and the work of our elders and how they've set us up in this intergenerational like work that we're doing. But I think we do tend to ask questions like, what does this community need? I think that's something that's very big. I think we are trying to, unpack what it means to be in policy spaces, what it means to be in legal spaces, because for so long, that's been something that has definitely been a very elitist concept. Only certain people were allowed in these spaces. But when we're talking about things like gender-based violence or white supremacy or any form of, injustice, we are the people closest to those conflicts. And so kind of reframing things and saying like, what do our communities need? And starting from that point and then building out, I think is something that a lot of organizers and young people currently are doing, whether they're in the policy space or whether they are like on the ground and organizing within their communities. It's constantly asking those questions. Are the right people here telling their own stories rather than having this idea that we have to be the voices for others? So I would say that's something that we're doing.
That's great. That's great. I mean, every approach is valuable. And I'm always excited and really enlightened by the work. I'm excited about and enlightened by the work that younger people are doing and the different ideas that they have about how to tackle these problems. Fortunately, I teach, so I have a chance to see different generations and what they do and how they approach problems, and I always learn.
Thank you. So I'm going to move us into our next question because I know we have so many other questions and our viewers definitely want to chime in later. So our second question is, you talk about your mother and being raised with the mentality of kind of keeping things to yourself, not talking too much about your problems publicly. You also discussed the idea of a perfect survivor and how that doesn't really exist. What helped you build the courage to go against the way in which you were raised and socialized to testify and speak your truth? How did you stay grounded in your truth when you opened up to the world?
Well, I'll talk about both. I want to talk about this perfect victim trope, which is a myth. But I really want to clear up something. My mother was very private, and a lot of her her tendency toward privacy and keeping quiet was born of survival. I mean, she was born in 1911. On Saturday, if she'd lived, she'd be 110 years old. She, of course, is no longer with me, in body anyway, but she's always there in spirit. And keeping quiet at a point through most of her life was the way to keep safe. And so it wasn't that she never raised her voice, but she, I think she had a very strong protective trait in her character, and she wanted to protect her children from harm. And so that's what she counseled. However, she also counseled something that might sound contradictory, and that is that, there are times when you have to speak up. And it was interesting in 1991 when I talked to my parents about the fact that I was going to testify. There was not an objection either from her or my father. They understood why I was stepping up and why I was coming forward and why I was speaking out. And they loved and supported me throughout it all. And I never heard them say, maybe you shouldn't have done this, even through all of the turmoil that came afterwards. As a matter of fact, even when I myself would feel a little sad or as though none of it mattered, she was the one who told me how important it was and how it was not only my right, but my responsibility to come forward. And so there's one thing to be private, but she taught me that. But she also taught me that you have a responsibility to tell the truth. And for something as big as a lifetime appointment to the country's highest court, as a lawyer, I felt that responsibility very keenly. Now, the perfect victim. The perfect victim myth is something, it's part of the sort of rape myths that we know exist, but it's not just the perfect victim of rape. It's the perfect victim of any form of gender violence. That means typically that when somebody raises a claim, whether it's a complaint about sexual assault or harassment, sexual intimate partner violence or dating violence, bullying or harassment in school, that they get interrogated. And people ask questions like, well, what were you wearing and were you drinking? And, what did you say that might have encouraged this behavior? Or was it really that person's fault, or aren't you partially or altogether to blame? I mean, those come from this idea that out there is someone that, of course, you will believe if they claim sexual assault or rape, because they are the perfect victim. You know, they can answer all of those questions in ways that satisfy people. And then the bottom line is that there's no one who can answer all of those questions to satisfy people. That those questions really aren't an effort to get and to offer you protection and comfort. Those questions are there to live in what I call denial of the problem of gender violence. And so they keep getting repeated, and very often, if not always, the person who has been abused will come up lacking. Culturally, there is no perfect victim, and therefore, culturally, society says, well, we don't have to do anything because maybe it was their fault, or maybe they were drinking, or maybe they said something that was suggestive. And so that perfect victim doesn't exist. It's a fiction of somebody's imagination. And unfortunately, it's a tool to keep victims silent, and as well to allow predatory behavior often to go unchecked. One of the things that I was listening to a couple of weeks ago involving teenagers was a testimony of the US Olympic gymnasts who testified that they filed a complaint with the FBI against Larry Nassar years before he was found guilty and convicted of sexual assault of hundreds, I believe, of victims, at least more than 100. And certainly, the calculations, people have not really actually calculated how many people he abused, many of them minors. And what happened in that situation was that the FBI was notified of the behavior years before he was finally brought to justice, but they chose not to investigate further. And that shows not only a system failure, but my thinking is that that agent, there were two of them actually, neither did anything because they were looking for that perfect victim. And they were following that myth, that trope that, these children couldn't be trusted to tell the truth. And so, we know that the consequences now of that failure to investigate resulted in 70 to 100 more victims that occurred after complaints. A number of complaints were filed. So they're really, really dangerous. These myths are, and if we don't build them out of our culture and realize that they sometimes get embedded in our systems and our structures, then we will be forever, ever having to address serial abuse.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. Ashley and I spoke a little bit about the pressures of being Black people and that perfect victim trope, and how oftentimes that's why when Black women or Black people are harmed or, go missing, it takes a very long time for our crimes to be investigated or for people to believe us, and how that continues to just plague our communities. And so I guess I would love to ask, what advice would you give to someone who is also trying to unpack that for themselves? Because I feel like sometimes those thoughts kind of live within our minds that, even when we do, or, tell our families about, things that occur to us, sometimes it becomes a battle because that perfect victim trope exists within our own minds. So how would somebody, I guess, navigate through that?
Yeah, we limit ourselves, we self-police, we convince ourselves that it's not that bad, or, it's not worth the trouble, and it's basically, we basically have been telling ourselves that we're not worth the trouble. And so one of the things that when you're battling that, you have to talk to yourself and understand and find support, to say that you are valuable, that what is happening to you is painful and hurtful, and you acknowledge that, and other people should as well. That's not a simple thing to do. You can't, often you won't get everybody to move on it, but if you go to the right sources, the right resources, and Girls for Gender Equity is one of those, then I believe you can begin to rebuild your own confidence and belief in yourself, and be able to confront the issues. And then you can make the decisions about how you want to proceed. I think, the point that you raised, that was one that's a really important point about race. Race really compounds gender violence. It on top of the misogyny and sexism that's a part of gender violence, add race as another element, and it compounds the problem, which is why the rates of violence against Black women and Native women is so extraordinarily high, because of vestiges, I believe, of slavery, vestiges of colonialism in the Native populations, continue to have a hold on the way people respond to us. Girls for Gender Equity was part of the Survivors Agenda last year. And one of the things that I keep in my mind is the conclusion of so many of the survivors and victims at the agenda have been confronted with law enforcement that criminalizes them for their behavior, when they're the ones that are complaining about abuse. And, and that's, again, part of feeling like, if, to go to the police, you have to feel that one, you're going to be treated fairly, and that you deserve to be treated fairly. But very often that's not what you get. So we get back to that question of then, how do you deal with that? Well, you've got to deal on two fronts. You've got to deal on multiple fronts. You got to find some other ways to, if you can't tolerate the criminal justice system, and many people can't, can't tolerate being engaged, we have to find some alternatives for what gender justice looks like for Black women and Native women in particular. And those are hard questions, and they take a lot of time, and they take a lot of thinking and energy. And that, again, I think the generations can come together to have that conversation and to begin to build on what those structures and resources would look like.
Thank you for answering. I'm going to open up the floor again to invite Ashley to kind of like share about that. I know you touched on like, what does gender justice look like? And I would kind of like love for them to kind of give a response to that, just with like current.
Yeah, I think when it pertains to Black women, like this idea of a perfect victim becomes beyond a myth. It's just like, it's beyond a myth. I don't really have the language to articulate that any better. And I feel like because our identity lies in being traumatized and not acknowledging it, like it makes it hard for us to even see it as valid in ourselves. So like we could experience something that we know hurts us, but because society doesn't allow us to be victims, because we're constantly being traumatized, we just don't see it as something that should stop us. And then that turns into, oh, well, I'll just like leave this to think about it later, and then you never think about it, and then you have kids, and then they go through the same thing, and then they don't think about it, and it keeps going and going and going. So I think, Pony, to kind of answer your question, even though you asked Professor Hill, like, it really lies in acknowledging it for ourselves first before we could even get into trying to take down this entire myth for the entire society.
Can I ask now? Can I ask a question of both of you then? Because I hear what you're saying, Ashley, about it's beyond a myth. So how does it work if, and language matters, how we describe it matters, and it's hard to capture exactly how harmful it is, but how about if we start thinking about it as a weapon against us? Does that resonate at all with either of you?
Yeah, I think to like Ashley's point, this was something I was recently while reading your book, I was processing how often like within ourselves, and even when as a Black woman, like even if I'm having a rough day, even if, you know, I'm exhausted from work, I still have this mentality of like, I have to keep grinding, I have to keep going. Like there's no such thing as me having a bad day. There's no such thing of me like feeling low. And then I started comparing it to how I show up in spaces, because I have two younger siblings, one's 16, one is 9, and they're both young women. And so I was thinking like, how do I show up in spaces for them when that's how I am to myself? As much as I try to project like this big sister who is going to listen to all your problems, and I'm here and I'm affirming you and I love you and I want to uplift you, Black girl, how do I show up when they say like, this thing is hurting me? Do I like show up, you know, halfway where I'm like, oh, I'm sorry that's hurting you, and then, okay, but let's go, let's pick it up. Like genuinely asking myself that. And so I think like to Ashley's point, it's having those like genuine conversations, that genuine moment, and admitting that it is violence. Like it is a part of like, when people say like, oh, decolonize the white supremacist in your mind, that is a real thing that like, while I was reading, I was like kind of confronted with like, this is real. And like, again, if this is real for me, how do I project it? Even if I think all along I've been being the best big sister, like, how have I not allowed them to just like stop and rest, or to just give them softness when they need it, so they too learn softness, and then for the next generation, they're able to give that softness off. So I guess I hope that answers the question, and I'll open it up to Ashley.
But I just also remind you to give softness to yourself, to not be so hard on yourself, because you know you've been tough. You know and that you're giving softness to yourself allows them the license to give softness to themselves, not just to others.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Can you repeat the question, please?
The question was from Professor Hill, and it was more so on, you talked about it's not just a myth. And so she was wondering like, how then should we like perceive it? Should we like look at it as, you know, actual like violence, and then moving forward, like how to tackle it?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely like an act of violence. Like you said, a weapon. How should we go about tackling it? Definitely not, Pony and I spoke about this before, like definitely not interpreting our trauma as a moment of embarrassment. Like personally, when things happen to me, like even though I am healing and I am beginning to understand my trauma as like, yes, that happened to you, but that is not what you are. Like before this, I was just like, I can never talk about this. Like, this is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. Not because it hurt me, but because like maybe other people can see it too. And like, maybe I feel alone in this, even though I'm not. Like really talking about it with myself and talking about it with my family and my community, and not interpreting it as like some, like, yes, it's an action that was done to break me down, but not let it do that. Like not let it do it, not let it break me down internally, because externally, like strong Black woman, people are going to view me as this invincible being who can never be hurt, even though everyone has the goal of hurting me, essentially. Like not letting that be the reality.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think you just that that's very moving. And I think we have to understand that we need communities of people who really see us, who understand what we're talking about. And finding those communities gives you, it affirms you. It makes you feel less alone. And so having those communities around you, surrounding, being able to, of course, speak about how you feel in any space, but also being in communities where you just feel comfortable. You can actually say what you feel and how you feel and why you feel it are very, very important.
Yeah. Well, this conversation is so great. And I promise you, Ashley and I, we've been plotting on this. We could sit here with you this whole time, but we don't want to be stingy. So I definitely want to pass on some questions from our audience members. So the first question comes from Ash, and they say, while we contribute to building a future free of gender-based violence, what is your advice for self and community care practice to support us in this work?
Well, you've already found one resource, and I'm sure that there are other resources as well out there. But one of the things that I find very exciting about Joanne Smith, and she's a model for you, is her social entrepreneurship. So, in addition to availing yourself of resources like GGE, think of your own kind of organizations and events that you would like to be a part of, that you would like to help create, that you would like to. It doesn't have to be an ongoing organization. It can be. GGE has done remarkably well in this space of nonprofits. But even putting together a chat group or an event that's a one-time event, a program of some sort, all of this is valuable, and it helps build communities, and the communities don't have to exist forever. They can exist for a period of time. So I say use your creativity. Find the people who are like-minded, and then work together to create something that's your own and that speaks to your needs, as well as, I'm absolutely sure if you find it and you develop it, there are other people who are needing it too.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I know this question was for everyone on the panel, so Ashley, feel free to respond next. I would definitely agree to everything Professor Hill just said. I think if you are somebody who is an organizer or a community leader, I think, yes, the work is very important and tackling those big issues is very important, but also tackling joy, especially when you're working in spaces that are predominantly Black, and you're dealing with marginalized identities. I think it's very important to prioritize joy and a good time. And so sometimes that is, like book clubs, if folks want to get together and read and then, dissect what they read and talk about, how it connects with our communities. I think that's a beautiful way. I love poetry. And so I love whenever organizations I'm connected to will do like a poetry weekend, a poetry night, or like, an annual get together, function, dance, or during the fall, they'll have different events. So I think grounding yourself in joy, even within movement work, is really important, because you're not only doing the work, you're trying to build community, and how we rely on one another and feel close to each other is also through joy, not just, struggling, not just oh, these are the people I can call when, everything's falling apart, but also these are the people I can call to laugh and have a good time with when things are hard in this world. So that's my advice.
Great.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of the time we do forget that we are, at the end of the day, people. We can do all of the activist work in the world. We can talk to all the politicians and all the teachers and professors and all the lawmakers, but at the end of the day, excuse the background noise, like we still have to find joy at the end of the day. Like Pony just said, I think really reaching within ourselves to find the humanity in the work that we do. I know, like for me specifically, like I often fall down the rabbit hole of doing social justice work, and I forget that like this is heavy stuff. Like I can't just indulge in this all day and not find time to just breathe. So really like taking a step back and finding the happiness in the work that's being done, because yes, it is hard work and it does take a lot, and sometimes you don't see the results right away. So just remembering that simply doing it, like saying something about it, is enough, and that can just be all the work you do that day or that week or that year. Like it doesn't have to be this like grand thing. It could be just talking about it and being okay with that.
Right. Thank you. And I'm going to pivot us into the next question from our audience member. Jessica says, Anita talked about being a teacher and being able to see and hear her students over the years. What does she see as some of the commonalities over time that are the most successful ways to eradicate gender violence?
Well, I that's a hard question, because I think the effort to end gender violence really came after my first years of teaching. I mean, when I first started teaching, it was nearly 40 years ago. And so there was not much of a movement and of any, in any real way on college campuses. That movement has grown, of course. And I think at this point, though, I mean, that everyone is keen on identifying the behavior and calling out the behavior. And I think that has been a common thread, calling out bad behavior for what it is. But what is new now, I think, is the movement to attribute the bad behavior and the lack of enforcement against that to the institutions. If I would say the first wave really was let's call this out. Let's make sure we get predators off campus, or people who have been rapists or people who have assaulted other people. Let's get them off campus. And now, well, I think we're looking at it a little deeper. We're looking at how our campuses are actually failing us and complicit in it, in the bad behavior. More than just the individual responsibility, we're looking for institutional responsibility. But accountability for bad behavior is still it's still a priority in many ways, but we've just added to our thinking about how we make sure that we hold everyone accountable.
Thank you so much for that. And so before I don't know, Ashley, did you have anything to share with that question?
Can you repeat it again if we have time? I don't want to go over too much.
It was mainly, well, I guess it was directed specifically for Professor Hill, and just talking about like what ways it should be assessed. But so there were still like a couple more questions, but we just don't have the time. And I'm telling you, if we could be here for hours and hours and hours, we would. But before we end the night, Ashley and I wanted to share our dreams for you as a leader, and with the utmost respect and elder in this work. And after we share our dreams for you, we wanted to know if you have any dreams for us and this generation of other young people centered in equity and justice work. And so Ashley, if you want to share your closing offering / dream for Professor Hill.
My dream for you and also like anyone in the community is to keep going. Like, I know it's hard work. It definitely does get a little too heavy most of the time, but it's worth it. Like, I it's inspiring, to be honest, to see someone who has been doing this for most of their career and still like get up every day and do it and devote their lives to making sure that the people before and after them are safe and are seeking justice, and making sure that, you know, when you can't do this anymore, when you retire or whatever the case may be, like there is still going to be something that the next generation can build off on.
And I would say my dream is that you continue holding our figurative hands, but also literally. I would say that I think for a lot of us, sometimes for a while, there was this dynamic of like generational wars, or like, you know, this generation isn't doing what they need to be doing, or, you know, looking down on like younger generations and saying, this is not how we would have done it. And so sometimes when we have those moments where we're connected to our elders and we have elders who will stand next to us and help open the doors that we can't reach yet, it's really inspiring and motivational. And I also think that it speaks to what this whole chat is about, the intergenerationalness of this work. And so pretty much it's just that constant of, it's not something that one generation is going to solve all on their own, but work that we understand that we're just going to continue building blocks and helping one another, you know, climb up, and then the next generation will do the same. And so I think within that, it's just continuing doing what you're doing, being open to just talk to us and motivate us. This tonight has been so amazing for both Ashley and I, and everyone I'm sure that's watching. And so that's what I would just say that my dream is.
Well, and I will be quick. I think quickly, let me just say this. First of all, thank you both, because you have energized me on in a week when I've been, you know, really thinking about things that the past. You've helped me to think about the future. Being in conversation with you will inspire me to do exactly what you dream, to continue the work that I'm doing. And my dream for you is that you will do something that will transform the world. That's simply put. I don't know what it's going to be. It's a dream, but the reason that I'm confident that it can happen is that I see so much in you. I see so much thought. I see so much even experience at your age, and I think, you know, I also see the passion and will to do great work and to change the world. So that's my dream, and not something that I think is unachievable. I think it's absolutely in your future.
Thank you so much. And now I believe I will pass it back to Joanne to close us off. Again, thank you.
Thank you. Thank all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank all three of you. I know myself and the audience is full, and so thankful for this conversation. And I hope that tonight moves each of you really closer to healing. That is my dream for you, that you can save some for yourself. So Believing is in stores now. GGE's 20-year anniversary campaign has officially launched. This is why we do this work at GGE. Please follow us if you are not following us at GGE NYC on our IG and Twitter. And thank you to our marketing and storytelling team for bringing us together tonight. The beautiful graphics, beautiful newsletters, just the beautiful way you hold the space for us. Thank you to Pony and Ashley, and to the one and only Anita Hill. Thank you to our friends and community for joining us tonight and contributing. And we look forward to seeing you again. We're going to celebrate for the next year. So many more conversations to come. Thank you, everybody. Good night.